Does it sound like it? Oh, here we go. All right. Thank you. Aloha, everybody.
Aloha.
It is great to see you. We had on our list there were going to be 185 people. It looks more like about 485. Everybody. I really want to thank Dale and the students and Brother Bernie and everybody at Chaminade who put this together. There's a lot of Chaminade people here. There are a lot of people from the rest of the community, but let's give a hand for Chaminade for hosting us. So, look, these have been incredibly challenging times for all of us since November 8th, for the community, for Hawaii, for the country, and I think for a lot of us personally trying to figure out how best to be of service, how best to be of use in the context of this new administration and the Republican House and Senate. And so I think there are people who kind of go between being fired up and exhilarated and being terrified and angry, and sometimes within the same sentence. But I want to focus on the positive because I think it is worth lingering on for a moment. I mean, I was, Inauguration Day, to be there on the dais and to experience that was surreal and not in a good way. But suddenly, I was there for the weekend, which is somewhat unusual for me. I try to get home when I can, but I was there for the weekend, and I saw more than 200, or at least around 200 people from Hawaii who flew in for that Women's March. And it was just exactly what I needed. And I think the point here is, first of all, we understand that we are this great experiment in self-governance, but sometimes it doesn't feel like that, right? Sometimes it doesn't feel like that. And I think what we've seen over the last several months in terms of unprecedented citizen engagement, the resistance, if you will, is that we still run our government. And there are moments of frustration and appropriate outrage, and there may be a series of rolling constitutional crises. So I'm not trying to diminish the challenges that we face, but I'm also not trying to diminish the power that we all have. And what I saw even the first couple of months of this Congress, in my 5th year in the United States Senate, is by about a factor of 3, and some days by a factor of 30, more people engaged in communicating with me and communicating with Congress than literally ever before in American history. The Capitol, I'm not allowed to give the numbers for security purposes, but I will just say that the Capitol switchboard had its busiest days ever. And then every day was the busiest day ever, and then every day was setting a record. It was mostly around Betsy DeVos and Jeff Sessions. That was the peak of it. Thank you, everybody. But it was an incredible experience, and that's not, first of all, I think we've all got to get engaged because it is important to exercise our responsibilities as citizens, but I want you to understand it actually has made an impact. There is no doubt in my mind that the Affordable Care Act would not still be on the books were it not for people like all of you across the country.
Yeah.
I really, really appreciate everything that you're doing. Just some ground rules. I'm going to try not to speechify too much. I'm going to try to answer as many questions as I can. If we don't get to your question, some of you will have reduced it to writing, and I will get back to you in writing. But obviously, we got too many people for me to answer every single person's question. If you have a question that is substantially similar to someone else's, we're going to try to batch them together, and I can cover the topic. We are Hawaii. That's important to say. We understand it, but it also means that we conduct ourselves in a different way. So if there are Trump supporters, if there are moderates, if there are Republicans, if there are Green Party supporters, if there are people who think I'm great, if there are people who think I stink, everybody gets to say their piece, okay? Okay? Everybody gets to say. Okay, so how do I approach this job? And I'm going to try to hurry through this part so we can get straight to the questions. 3 sort of separate tracks. The first is I'm on the Appropriations Committee, and it is absolutely critical that I fight for federal funding for the state of Hawaii. So that's sort of one very pragmatic track. Doesn't matter who's president, doesn't matter whether we run the Senate or don't run the Senate. Part of my job is the practical aspect of making sure for transportation, for energy, for health, for Native Hawaiian health care, whatever it may be, that I protect those funding lines coming to the state of Hawaii. We are 5,000 miles away from Washington, and we need, as a congressional delegation, to have that focus no matter what else is happening. The second thing, which is new, is resisting the Trump agenda. And I will... I'll go into a couple, obviously we'll go pretty deep into that, but I'll go into a couple of things in a moment. And then the third thing is to kind of find, the Senate is still the place that requires bipartisanship in order to enact legislation. For legislation, you still need 60 votes. And so one of the things that you try to do, even as you, as Teddy Kennedy said, roar on the floor, right? Even as you do these battles that are about lawfulness, that are about core values, that are about the Constitution, that are literally about the country, you also try to find room for bipartisanship. So let me just start with that, and I'll just be very brief in this space, but I want you to know that there are still people of goodwill on both sides trying to do important things. Telehealth is really the future of healthcare, and I'm so committed to you, I didn't even bring my phone in my pocket, but I want you to understand that the ability to get healthcare cheaper and more available and at a higher quality depends over time on many, many things, but among them, your ability to communicate with a healthcare provider using a device. Now, this is something the private sector has figured out. This is actually something the VA has figured out. This is something the Department of Defense has figured out. So if you need psychology, psychiatry, dermatology, there are a lot of opportunities if you live, especially in rural Hawaii, to receive health care using a primary care physician or a specialist, but using the equivalent of a VTC. Why does that matter? You can reduce costs and increase the quality of care. I have a bill that has 10 Republicans and 10 Democrats in the Senate and 33 Republicans and Democrats in the House that will basically repeal a statute. It's a part of the Medicare statute that determines who gets reimbursed for what. And basically right now, telehealth is not reimbursable under Medicare. Here's the problem. As long as the biggest payer in healthcare is not reimbursing for telehealth, we're not going to be able to move forward with telehealth. And so we have broad bipartisan support for this legislation, which I truly believe will revolutionize healthcare. Why do I talk about that? Because it's important to start with things that are important to do, with things that we have bipartisan support to do, and things that will for sure not end up on Twitter or on a Sunday show as a matter of contention, and that's okay. You know, part of what I have to do is just the work, right? And you may not hear about that, and you may not necessarily be organized to lobby me for that. That's cool. I just want you to know that as we talk about these bigger issues, Syria and Russia and taxes and ACA, that underneath your senator has to do a job, and some of that is not about the stuff that's going to make my Facebook page pop. Okay, so that's telehealth. On federal funding, I want to give you some encouraging news, but I want to be somewhat careful about how I phrase this. The collapse of Trump care has caused the Republicans to recalibrate their appetite for risk, okay? Because basically they just made a mess of themselves and so what's the practical impact of that? On April 28th, they were talking about trying to force us into a position where we would accept funding for the wall or there would be a government shutdown, right? After the ACA repeal collapsed, their thought process is now in sort of political risk management, and now they're talking about doing regular appropriations bills on a bipartisan basis. So there is a direct line between what the resistance did and my ability to work on a bipartisan basis on pragmatic stuff. What that would mean is that if you have a 60-vote appropriations bill, it's got all the stuff I've been fighting for. I'm on the Defense Appropriations Committee, I'm on the Military Construction and VA Subcommittee, I'm on the Labor HHS subcommittee. I'm on the Transportation and HUD subcommittee, and we don't always get everything that we want. But if it is a bipartisan bill, rest assured that we got flat to slight increases in funding across all 12 executive agencies. So there is a possibility that we will be in much better shape from a budget and appropriations standpoint than we could have reasonably anticipated given the election results. That is not for sure, but it looks a lot more likely than it did, 3 or 4 weeks ago. Finally, I'll just cover 3 issues that are in the news and then open it up to questions. Syria. What Assad did was a crime against humanity. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But here's the problem. The problem is that a retaliation is not a strategy. And there is I am on the dovish side, but I'm not a total dove. There are moments where I think retaliation is appropriate and part of a larger strategy. But the idea that the commander-in-chief changed his mind in a 36-hour period on the basis of some images, and we're now trying to work backwards into a strategy for Syria should be alarming. What we need, and just to get a little sort of more granular about this, our ability to prosecute the so-called war on terror is based on an authorization of the use of military force, a legislative vehicle which was passed in 2001. It said you can go after Al-Qaeda and affiliated groups. Okay? So that's what you can go after. There was no time limitation. There was no geographic limitation. Now that is the first AUMF of its kind, where you can fight these bad guys wherever they may be for as long as it is necessary. Okay? But even under that super broad AUMF, what was done in Syria was not authorized. Because Assad is as bad as of a person, as murderous of a dictator as there is on this planet, and even over the last several generations. That much is true. But attacking the Syrian government is not covered by the AUMF. And so that is my concern. And there is a reason that's not just legalistic about coming to the Congress. The reason you come to the Congress is you have civilian oversight of the military, and you want some strategies to be developed. Now, I happen to think General Mattis is about as good as we can do in terms of a Secretary of Defense under Donald Trump. I was very reassured by his adult behavior. He is not a climate denier. He is not overly hawkish for a SecDef. But he's a thoughtful guy. He's a planful guy. I mean, he's the guy who said, when they were talking about cutting the State Department budget, he said, you cut the State Department budget and I'm going to need more ammunition. I mean, this is a person who has been in a warfighting environment for a long, long time and tries to do whatever he can to avoid war. But if all Trump is doing is surrounding himself with battlefield commanders and warfighters, then the only options on the table are battle plans. And when it comes to Syria, the solution has to be a political one. I'm not suggesting this is easy. I'm just suggesting that we are perfectly capable of going into a country in the Middle East and making a terrible situation even worse. And we have to be very, very cautious about that. On Neil Gorsuch, I'm not going to linger on this just because personally I don't want to linger on it. That was maybe the worst week that I've had in the Senate in quite a long time, but I'll just tell you why I voted no. First of all, he's a brilliant jurist. I have no doubt that he's impeccable in the sense that anybody who's been vetted by the Federalist Society is going to meet all the marks. And there's a little bit of a snobbery, with all due respect to anyone who's a member of the bar, among lawyers about, he writes so cleanly and everybody he's worked with says he's a great guy. And I grant you that anybody that they're going to put forward is going to meet all those marks. Right? And is going to be assiduously, mostly careful about avoiding any of these hot button issues. But what got me about Gorsuch was that he really does think corporations have the constitutional rights that humans have. And this is not a theoretical thing. So corporate personhood was a legal construct to allow corporations to form, basically to aggregate capital and to be somewhat protected from lawsuits, right? It's just a sort of function in the marketplace. Now that's a good thing, but they called it personhood, and then that became literal personhood in the 70s. And then this concept of corporate personhood got big expansion in Citizens United, as you all know, but also in the Hobby Lobby decision, where Gorsuch specifically wants to confer religious freedom rights to a corporate entity. And it's not at all clear to me where this line of thinking is ever going to stop. Which of your rights under the Constitution are also available to corporations? Fourth Amendment privacy rights, Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. It's not clear if they have First Amendment rights, why they wouldn't have all of the rights under the Bill of Rights and under the Constitution. And so when it came down to it, I felt like I might be able to see my way to yes, were he not so ideological about what I think is structurally wrong with the court. And so I was, after watching that hearing, I was a firm no. Finally, so on ACA, I think it's dead. I mean, excuse not ACA, but Trump Care. The reform of the change of ACA, I really do think that they're going to keep flapping their jaws, but they don't have the votes and they don't have the political will. And I am now torn between wanting them to do it, so they'll lose another 14 points in the polls. Not do it, but try to do it. So I don't think that's going to happen. But what I've seen is they wanted to do three things: tax reform, ACA repeal, and infrastructure. And if you sort of scratch hard enough below the surface of all three headlines, actually they're doing the same thing in all three categories, which is a wealth transfer to Wall Street. So the infrastructure bill is really interesting because, I mean, everybody's for more spending on infrastructure. It's a low interest rate environment. We need infrastructure spending. But if you listen to what they're talking about, it is a subsidy for lenders, okay? So when the city and county of Honolulu has to float a general obligation bond, right? They actually have to go to Wall Street and someone will purchase a municipal bond, in the hundreds of millions range. So the public-private partnership that they're talking about is actually a subsidy to Goldman, right? And all the big banks that do the lending, with the hope that they would remit some of the savings back to the city and county of Honolulu, and they would remit some of the savings back to the city and county of Honolulu's taxpayers, okay? Then you take tax reform, and what they want to do is a border adjustment tax, which is essentially, it's Paul Ryan's baby. It's a super bad idea. It's really an extraordinarily bad idea, because in order to reduce the top marginal rates for corporations and for individuals, he needs revenue, okay? And in order to find that revenue, he's going to tax everything in America that you buy, a good or a service. And the idea is, if you tax a banana in Hawaii, but you don't tax an exported banana, that will precipitate bananas being exported, right? Because we want to change our trade deficit. It is the most convoluted nonsense, and I got to tell you that there aren't even good economists, there aren't even like wonky right-wing economists that like this idea. There's just nobody except Paul Ryan who likes this border adjustment tax. Because I'm saying, wait, you're going to reduce corporate tax rates and increase the price of groceries. Well, let's see how that works out. So I think tax reform is dead for the year. Mnuchin just announced that he doesn't think August is a realistic time frame. And for those of you who know politics, delaying something by any more than like 6 months means it's kind of like indefinitely delayed. And then there's infrastructure. But I think the point being that there is incredible damage being done to the republic as we speak. That is all true. But also, if you told me that we would still have ACA on the books, that we would be competing in Georgia and Kansas and Montana, that we'd have 3 times the amount of citizen engagement that we've ever had before, and if you told me that most of Trump's legislative agenda was either dead or dying on the vine, I would say, I'll take it. We've got some incredible challenges in front of us. We've got some really incredibly important challenges, and so I don't want to strike too much of a hopeful note, frankly. We've got lots of work to do. But I think it's not trivial what we've already accomplished together. So with that, what do I do, Mike? Oh, Sarah will introduce the questioners.
So again, we're going to call a few names in a row, and if you could try to carefully make your way to the microphone. And if you don't want to try to, you can sort of just like flag at me and I'll read the question for you. So the first three questions are from Katrina. Irene Morrow on internet privacy. Oh, I'm sorry if I get your name wrong. I'm going to try my best. Marcus Wallace on student debt. And Shalane Sambora on the democratic effectiveness in Congress. So,
thank you for being here, Sarah Schatz. We're really excited. So my question is about climate change. As a citizen of Hawaii, we don't really have the luxury of ignoring or denying the evidence that supports that the climate is changing. But I also know that as a senator that you have to balance kind of some of the immediate concerns such as education and healthcare. So I would like you to speak a little bit about how you prioritize things like climate change, which are immediate to us in like the state of Florida, and what you are planning to do or what you have in the works to kind of protect our environment in terms of climate change.
Let me take the question about balance. I'll try to do that quickly, and then we'll talk about climate a little bit. Thanks for the question. The question is sort of how do I sort of prioritize and triage, given that every day something is on fire and climate change. Climate change is certainly urgent, but not in necessarily the same way as the North Korean missile test is. Look, I think one of the great luxuries of being a Senate office is to be able to do multiple things at once, and so I just work those issues and try to have, literally a yellow pad and then also on my phone what is urgent and what is pressing and what is short term and what are the 3 or 4 things that I want to accomplish in a particular year. So that's how I kind of organize my own thoughts, not always successfully, but reasonably well. On climate change, I'll just offer you this. We are on track to meet our Paris obligations through 2020. The big challenge is the next tranche. And there are 2 ways to get there. One would be to have a new president in 2020. And the other is, in all seriousness, the other is that a lot of the most exciting stuff happening in clean energy is happening at the state or regional level, right? I mean, we don't give ourselves enough credit for having a 100% clean energy statute. I was in Paris talking to heads of state, talking about what we do, and it's pretty extraordinary what we've been able to accomplish. We're now at, as of 2015, just around 24% clean energy statewide, and that number keeps growing. But that's also there's a regional program with New England. California has its own cap and trade system. So what may end up happening is the private sector, cities, and regions and states make up the difference for the lack of impetus at EPA and through the Clean Power Plan.
Okay, good.
next question is from Irene Morrow on internet privacy and Jenny Farley. If you could make your way to the microphone.
Hi, I'm Irene. Hi, Senator Schatz. Thank you to you and your staff for your hard work. This is actually a question from myself and my husband who couldn't be here, but we're concerned about the recent actions taken by the FCC chairman to deregulate protections for consumers' privacy, letting internet service providers sell customers' data without our permission. And so now there's also plans to roll back net neutrality rules that would lead internet providers to decide if they want to adhere to open internet